If you've heard of games like Trek to Yumi, Enter the Gungeon, and Cult of the Lamb, you've likely heard of Devolver Digital. They've come with a really great reputation of just finding these amazing indie games that we've got. And we're lucky enough today here at PAX to be speaking to Graeme Struthers, one of the co-founders of Devolver Digital. Thank you so much for taking some time to have a chat with us.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. That was lovely.
That's all right. I do try sometimes. I must admit, I do have it written down pretty light and day on here, so that's me.
Okay.
So, like I said, Devolvers had quite an incredible track record with getting games out, and really interesting games with different art styles, different play styles. What would you say is like the way you find these titles? Because like it's very interesting. I think.
Yeah. I think if you look at the games we publish, oftentimes you'll find those are developers that we've been working with for multiple years. So actually, from the outside looking in, you might think that we are going in a certain direction, but actually we're following the direction of the developers. So if you look at, for example, Free Lives, first game we did with those guys was Broforce. They then followed that with Genital Jousting. They then followed that with Gorn, which was a VR game. Then they moved on to Cricket Through the Ages, which was a mobile game. And then they come back towards, like, you know, you've got Angerfoot and Terra Nil. So actually, it's in many regards, it's the developers, we're following them. And then I think the persistent theme with games that we're involved in is that, for us anyway, we just think they're very playable, very easy to understand. You pick up the controller, you actually kind of instantly know what you're here for and what you're going to be doing. So, yeah.
And that was leading into my next question here, because like the overarching philosophy seems to be with Devolver, you're there for the devs, like and it really shows in the work that the devs put out, because they bring these amazing titles. And I was in your panel yesterday that you did with How to Pitch to Devolver, and with the three devs and yourself there, but so there was Massive Monster, sorry, I have and All Possible Futures. And I remember a stat that you pulled out in there that since 2009, when you started, you've published 97 games and got 28 in development, which it kind of like averages out to about 4 a year, which doesn't seem like a huge amount, but I guess it's quality over quantity for you guys.
Yeah, and I think we seem to settle around about 10 to 12 new games each year. That seems to be our rhythm, and that seems to be enough. Because you've got to be able to focus on every single one and give them the attention they all deserve. So we feel that that's about the right level for us. And if you've got 12 games coming out in any given year, you've probably got another 20 plus in development. So behind the scenes, the producers are working on 3 or 4 projects at one time. And again, we feel that that's the right balance. If we do too much, we're going to lose, the focus, which would not be right.
That's right, yeah. If you can focus on the indie devs themselves and help them make the best product that they've got, then that works out for everybody in the end. I did want to check with you, what's sort of the biggest gamble that you've taken game-wise? Because I remember in the panel yesterday, you spoke about pitching the right game to the right publisher.
Right publisher, yeah.
So is there a game that Devolver have published that was sort of not quite a Devolver game?
Well, the one that was the biggest risk for both the developer and us was Fall Guys, because we'd never been involved in an online multiplayer game. It was going to be a live ops game. That was something we'd never even contemplated.
And it was huge.
And Mediatonic, the developer, were taking on, a really ballsy project. So I feel like we were both right for each other, because they were taking a huge risk as a studio and we were taking a huge risk as a publisher. And we were kind of learning that game on the job, and obviously it blew up. And when it did, it was like, oh, okay.
I remember launch weekend for that, and trying to get on, and how they were just massively trying to spin up more. So no, look, it's a problem that you want to have as a dev, isn't it, and a publisher, to see a game that's so big like that you need to spin up so many extra servers.
Indeed,
to be able
to. So I guess that would have been our biggest risk, because we were stepping into an area that we didn't really feel we had a lot of expertise. We had to learn that on the job.
So what sort of things came out of that made it different to...
Oh my God. Well, first and foremost, it's 24/7, and so as the game was taking off, the success in China, Japan, here in Australia, like time difference wise, as you mentioned, spinning up servers, but also just coping with the player balancing out. You know, like if you've got like a lot of people jumping on here, and they're matching into people who are playing in Europe, you just have all these latency issues. Everything just comes at once.
Yeah.
I mean, that game went from 0 to, I don't know, about 30 million people in around about 48 hours. 50, you know, so yeah, that's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, so some pretty good lessons learned there.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back a bit and talk about the history of Devolver Digital, if I can now. So in the research I was doing before our interview here, I came across 2 other companies that a lot of the co-founders of Devolver Digital. Yeah, so, and they sort of still had that same philosophy of devs first, but they were bought out and eventually kind of absorbed into bigger entities later on down the track. And Devolver's been going with 2009, so that's 23 years.
Oh no, we started in 2009.
Yeah.
So we're into year 13 now.
Oh, sorry, my math. Yeah, sorry,
okay.
I'm only 10 years off with math. What's 10 years?
Yeah.
But yeah, so what? And Devolver has outlived the lifespan of those companies.
Yeah.
So what kind of makes the setup of Devolver different to the other 2 companies?
It's really easy, digital. Yeah, because in the days of physical goods, so you'd fund all the money to make the video game, which might take 2-3 years, but when you got to the point of wanting to release the game, you had to then find more money to get into physical goods, to then build stock, ship all over the world, and then you had to wait for the retailers to pay you. So it changed the whole, when it went to digital, first and foremost, the business model shifted overnight. You know, Steam brought in 70%, came back to the publisher or the developer, and you got paid on the first of each month. So your cash flow just completely altered. It's a very boring topic, actually.
Well, but actually, you say that, but I find that really interesting in the shifting landscapes of things and like the trends that come out.
Digital's enabled small companies like ours to have a place to sell games, and it's allowed small developers to do the same. So it was pretty transformative. I'm sure people who are my age see it that way. Maybe people who are a bit younger don't see that because they never dealt with the old world of retail.
Well, that's it. And don't know, going down to the shop and picking up your big box PC game that was in a container like this. But you mentioned Fall Guys earlier, and that must have been a big boon for you. I know Epic has eventually bought it out and have the publishing rights there, but that has enabled you to do a lot of things. Like you've bought a few devs yourself to bolster your own stock. So is that something that's on the long-term plan for Devolver, to maybe acquire some studios?
You'd have to ask my boss. I think, like, when Fall Guys, as you say, it transformed everything. You know, you've got to look around and see what's happening in the industry. Some of the studios we've been working with, like Crow Team, for a long, long time, it was a natural fit for us to kind of just join forces. And some of the other teams, again, working with them for many years, and it felt like a natural fit. But we're not naturally like that. It's not something that we really, you know, we weren't trying to build a company in that sense, but that opportunity presented itself. Whether we'll do more of that, I guess it's possible, but it's not something we're getting out of bed in the morning thinking about.
You more want to be the conduit for the devs to get their games out.
I mean, it's like seeing like Massive Monster with Call of the Lamb. That's the kind of stuff that gets you excited, because you're seeing a small dev like find their audience and find their stride. It's pretty cool.
That's it. I love like the titles that get put out, like particularly Phantom Abyss. I love that game. That was such like Indiana Jones style whipping through. Like it's those concepts that just like you say, the prototype of the game that you might submit in your pitch, and I can imagine that just being there, and you're going, I really like this.
You can get that game. It's one of those. That's a good point. When you see that game, when we saw it for the first time, you understood what they were trying to do. It's very clear. Very clear vision.
So one thing that I do love about Devolver is how you poke fun at yourself. Like, even on the website, and I've written down some stuff here, is one of the quotes on the About Me section of the website is, a boutique game label owned and operated by a team that replies to Slack threads with a non-stop deluge of hilarious gifs and passive-aggressive shots at one another.
True.
So, and the stuff like your presentations that you do, like the character Nina, that keeps coming back, and even there was the Fork Parker series of games as well. Has that helped endear you to the public a bit more as well, do you think?
Yeah, I hope so. But it is kind of, what you see is what you get, and that is. But I mean, when on the website, what you're reading there is actually the reality of my day-to-day. So yeah, hopefully we come across as here we are. That's the whole point, really.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, I think when you're building that publicity for yourself, it really helps to show that you are that approachable, and you've got that sense of humour, and not everything's going to be, here's the official document for what we're doing, and and that's
video
really
games is fun, and it should seem like it's fun, because it is, right? All we're trying to do is just like give you a window into our life. So yeah.
So going back to the panel that you were doing yesterday, like heading in, I knew your reputation, and my opinion as well was that you guys are just amazing support for the devs there. But there was one thing that Jay from Massive Monster said that kind of stuck with me, and I'm going to paraphrase here a bit because I'm sure he was paraphrasing as well. But he said they sent in a pitch for a game, and that you guys sort of went back and went, "Are you sure this is enough money for what you want to do?" So that, and to me that just sort of encapsulated the idea of how you look after the devs as well. So you want them to make enough money to make sure their project succeeds.
The thing is it's when a developer's pitching, I mean, first and foremost is, I think Jay mentioned yesterday that they're already thinking about bootstrapping everything. So he mentioned living on noodles for 2 years. It's not a great way to be a creative person if you're struggling financially, if you're worrying about money, right? So bottom line is that it's that thing where you've got to figure out what they actually need with them. So you're sitting down, it's like if they think the project's going to take 2 years, we might think actually realistically it's maybe more like 3. And they may also have a situation where perhaps they think they only need 1 artist, and you think, well, actually this game's going to be very art heavy. So we use our experience to help them understand the project in its totality, and then of course that means more funding. But it's better to have those conversations at the start than fall into a situation where they haven't specced the game to the degree that they needed to, and then obviously they get to that point where they're beginning to worry about money, and that kills the creative process, right?
That's right. If you're struggling to live and having to eat the noodles, like Jay was saying that he was happy to keep doing, it does put a hamper on stuff. And I love hearing that story because once again it exemplifies how much invested the Devolver is in that.
Well, that's our job, right? That's what we do for a living, and helping the developer understand their project is part of the service, if you want to look at it that way.
So I think we're coming to the end of our time here, Graeme. I do want to thank you again for joining us, but before we do part ways, I do want to know, is there a particular game that's coming up for Devolver that you're really excited to see get released?
I mean, the honest answer, which probably sounds a little bit like a stock answer, is that whatever the next game is, because we tend to be like very focused on where we are at any given moment in time. So the next games that are coming up, which we're showing a couple of them here, those games have been in development for a couple of years, and so it's always exciting when you get to that last piece and you guys and people here get to start playing them and you see the reaction. That tends to be the thing that you focus on. The games that are coming out next year, the year after, they're kind of like, there's a lot of good stuff in there, don't get me wrong, but you don't tend to think about that until the last 3 or 4 months. So. Yeah.
Well, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here at PAX.